Is DeepSeek a ChatGPT killer? Don't know, but it's very similar to ChatGPT and yet completely free on the web or in an app. And the cool thing is it's getting more powerful all the time. And we saw that this week with their new deep reasoning model, which you can turn on by selecting DeepThink when you prompt it. And this new model looks to be at least on par with ChatGPT's deep reasoning model, O1, for which they charge $200 a month, but DeepThink is free. It's also open source and the API is very cheap, but we're getting quite into the jargon there, so I thought I'd just take a minute just to explain what these things mean in really simple terms. So firstly, deep reasoning models, sometimes referred to as chain of thought models. What they do is instead of immediately answering your question, they engage in a conversation with themselves and they work out what you want, what your question means, and how best to answer it. And this technique of getting the AI to think for longer, sometimes a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes, is getting really great results. And DeepSeek's latest model, R1, you can see it talking to itself, right, thinking through the problem, and it's just so human-like. It's actually quite eerie. You should definitely just have a go with it. So that's what that means. Then it's open source, so it's released under this license known as the MIT Open Source License for Distillation and Commercialization. What that means is, so the MIT Open Source License, it's a very open license, and it basically makes the technology publicly, freely available. Anyone can look at it, they can change it, they can redistribute it themselves, they can use it in personal, educational, commercial projects, and they don't have to pay any royalties to DeepSeek, right? There are some requirements. Two of the main ones are that they have to keep the original copyright notice and the license details in the source code, and they also have to understand that DeepSeek will not be held liable for anything bad that happens because someone used their open source code. It also allows people to distill the model into something smaller and more efficient in the future, making it easy to distribute and run on lesser consumer hardware, potentially, something like that. And then there's the API, which for developers of apps is very, very cheap to tap into and use for their apps. So let's say I was building a meal planning app that writes recipes for you. I could very easily tap into DeepSeek's API and very cheaply do that, just a few lines of code. Because you might be wondering, why would anyone pay for the API if the whole thing's open source? The reality is, to download the DeepSeek model, which is a humongous set of files, you wouldn't be able to fit it on your own computer, and then run that on servers reliably would be pretty complex and pretty expensive. So it's much more convenient to just outsource all of that complexity and expense and pay micro sums of money to call an API each time your user uses your app or website. DeepSeek's API cost is very low. It's a couple of dollars per million tokens output for the deep reasoning model. It's about $1 for the normal chat model for a million tokens output. And the reason they can charge so much less than the big AI companies that you've heard of is because DeepSeek didn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars training their models. They only spent a few $1 million. So the whole thing was just cheaper to put together.